Welcome back to the Agriland Pavilion here at the National Ploughing Championships in Ratheniska in County Laois. We're back to our live discussions now again, and I'm joined on our live stage by Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine, Charlie McConalogue. Minister, thank you for joining us today.
Stella.
So I suppose we've a lot to talk about, but the most important thing that I must talk to you about is the elephant in the room. We're at the National Ploughing Championships, and obviously there's consideration being given to suggestions and recommendations that there may be a ban on ploughing on certain carbon-rich soils, or certainly at least min-till on certain soils. Relative to what we're experiencing today and the importance of an event like this, how do you feel about that proposal?
Yeah, I mean, ploughing is absolutely essential part of our farming model. It's been critical to our tillage sector in particular, and it's been critical for reseeding and for good management of grassland as well. Obviously, we have seen movements towards min-till in recent years, which has worked really well in terms of a cost point of view and been a very useful tool too. But it's going to be really important going forward that we continue to have effective management of our grassland. So there is no proposals in place in relation to banning ploughing. Obviously, as we step out into the years ahead, we're going to have to look at how we manage our grassland well, how we make sure that it's as productive as possible, how we make sure it reduces emissions, but alongside that, the role of ploughing is going to remain essential in my view.
I'll move to the Acre Scheme now, obviously something that you have been a big proponent of. And when the Acre Scheme initially came out, which is, I suppose, like reps and not like reps, depending on what farmer you talk to, but a lot of them are saying that they've looked into the detail of it, they've spoken to advisors, and while there seems to be more money invested in this scheme, farmers will get less in their pockets. So we're hearing, and I don't know if you anticipate this, but a lesser uptake of this scheme than maybe initially was anticipated.
No, I don't think so, and certainly I would hope not, because I think it is a really strong scheme, and I put 50% extra funding into this environmental scheme, and one of the key commitments I had before the government was formed, and in terms of my own party's manifesto, Fianna Fáil manifesto at the last election, was a really strong environmental scheme if we were successful in government. And like all three parties are very committed to actually a strong environmental scheme, and I think that's what we have. Obviously it is primarily European funding, about 60-40, so it has to meet standards and conditions in relation to the overall European CAP plan. So, and that means that you're paying farmers for doing certain actions, and those actions have to comply with the overall objectives at European level that are then translated into national level. And in terms of putting the scheme together, I've been working with the team in the Department of Agriculture to make sure that that we keep it as straightforward as we can. But I suppose bottom line is it does have to have conditionality, it does have to have actions, and while we will be trying to seek to ensure that it is practical for farmers and that we put very significant funding into it, there is obligations there. And that can be frustrating, but that's part of drawing down public money, a mixture of European money and national money. I'm engaging closely with the farm representatives and all of the organisations at the moment in relation to feedback, and I know it's a big task now over the next few months for agricultural advisors working with farmers to get as many applicants in as possible. I want as many to join up as possible. I want to make sure that we have as many as possible in that first tranche, and that we have as many fully involved in the scheme next year, and then to roll it out quickly afterwards. But I understand that frustration. People want it to be more straightforward, schemes to be more straightforward than they are. I want them to be as straightforward as possible. But you have to, since it's public money and then European money, which is part of the overall CAP plan, it has to be delivering on those objectives and actually paying for certain measures.
I think some of the concerns are surrounding the scorecard system. Now, we know this kind of system has been used previously in other schemes, but they were kind of to a smaller extent. They were smaller schemes. This is, I think, envisage 50,000 applicants if the full uptake is taken. That's a phenomenal amount of work for advisors, be it Teagasc, be it ACA or whoever's involved. Is it manageable?
I think it's a challenge, but I think it is manageable. But I'm not underestimating that it won't be without difficulty in terms of getting up and running. But it is the new way of the Common Agricultural Policy operating. The new CAP across the board for every country, and for our countries, for our national CAP plan to be approved and get approval to draw down that European funding. The schemes do have to be results-based in nature. That's a step change from the outgoing CAP, where schemes were more about actions. If you did the action, the result wasn't necessarily measured. Now it's not so much about the action, it's about what the result is and paying based on that. And that's the obligation on us. We don't have wriggle room in that if we want to do European and draw down the European CAP funding. So it's something that's going to be more of a challenge for farmers to get to adjust to. It's more of a challenge certainly for advisors as well. But I think the objective at Europe in terms of the European CAP is that actually it puts the focus on what the outcomes are. And listen, we don't have a choice but to work with it, but certainly as Minister what I want to do is ensure that it's as practical as possible. I'm listening carefully. I'll listen now as the schemes roll out to see how they're working in practice and to make sure that they're as practical as possible too. And ultimately what I want to ensure here is that we have a good strong environmental scheme and other good strong schemes too, which are paying significant funds to farmers, underpinning farm family incomes, and which are as practical as possible in terms of the delivery.
Minister, is it viable for dry stock or part-time farmers? I mean, we have, a Dáil representative saying that you need acres for acres and that they are going to be, smaller farmers will be relying on these top-up payments. Is it viable for them?
Yes, I think so. Absolutely. I think farmers are obviously going to have to look at the measures that are there. The measures are open to everyone and to every farming type. They might be less attractive to some farm types than others, but they're open to everyone, and farmers will get paid the same for those measures across various farm enterprise types as well. And I think farms with relatively small to medium size will be able to build a good, strong payment in it. It does mean adopting those actions and implementing them and then getting paid for them. And listen, I mean, my forum has been to try and support all farmers, particularly to give a fair crack of the whip to small and medium-sized farmers. So if you go back, for example, to the REAP scheme which I introduced, which was a pilot scheme to prepare the pathway to get learnings going in terms of the advisors that were taking part and also to get learnings for the farmers. If a farmer had just over 20 acres, 22 acres in that, they were able to draw down the full amount of the REAP scheme up to, which was work at the max worth about 12,000 over 2 years. So you didn't have to be large to do it, but you had to take on board the action. So now in this scheme, I think farmers of all types will be able to build a payment, but it does require doing those actions.
The actions though as well, I mean, we're hearing from farmers as well, inflation's biting. So some of, the methodologies or the actions that they have to take might cost a bit more nowadays than they would have even 6 months ago.
Well, I'm not so sure that's the case. Some of the actions, for example, are about lower input in terms of fertiliser, and the adoption of multi-species sward, etc. Those are win-wins because, all of the research is happening now in terms of whether it's Chuggask. They're doing great work in Johnstown Castle. I recently visited the UCD Lions Estates farm and the research they're doing, comparing traditional Italian ryegrass to clover swards to multi-species swards. And the evidence is actually, in terms of all that research, that animals on clover sward and animals on multi-species sward are actually performing more strongly, that actually there's better weight gain, earlier kill rate, and more dry matter produced on the land, as more dry matter grass produced on the same area, but with significantly reduced fertiliser input. Now it does require good attention to detail in relation to soil fertility, etc., but that reduces costs while maintaining and in some cases being able to increase production and also bringing you into that sphere where you're able to avail of acres too. So I think it makes even more sense in many ways in the new higher cost environment to consider that.
I need to talk to you widely now about the energy crisis and the cost of living difficulties that everyone across Ireland, farm families and others, are experiencing at the moment. You are in a party that's a coalition partner. Farmers have had massive increases this year on feed, fuel and fertiliser. This came as a result of many different factors. Ukraine, Russia, we had come out of COVID, Brexit is also still biting in our agri-trade business. What can you say ahead of the budget next week that's going to reassure people that are watching this today? Farm families that I suppose the Department of Agriculture is responsible for in trying to keep a sustainable and viable income and enterprise for farming in this country. How can you help them meet the cost rises that they're now experiencing?
Yeah, well, listen, obviously until the budget is published and agreed, I can't go into what the measures will be. But what I'd say is farmers can be absolutely assured that I'm doing everything possible now in relation to the government negotiations and the budgetary negotiations to ensure that the budgetary package is one that reflects the challenges that there in the sector and that supports farm families. And what I'd also say is to look at my forum and the government's forum over the course of this year in relation to actually responding to the challenges that were there for farmers, and responding particularly to the challenge that emerged as a result of the illegal invasion of Ukraine. So obviously that put significant pressure on energy, significant pressure on fertiliser, because Russia is a big supplier there, and also significant pressure on feed costs because of the real important role Ukraine plays in world grain supply. And to respond to that, I put in place the fodder scheme, which delivered up to €1,000 per farm family for making fodder and hay this year, and also put in place the tillage scheme as well, which delivered €400 a hectare for additional grain grown. Now, in terms of the grain, that has seen about just under a 7% increase in relation to the area under tillage this year, which has been very positive. And in relation to the drawdown of the fodder scheme, we have seen over €50 million delivered there to support farmers, and that's to ensure that activity is maintained, but particularly to support farmers in relation to the cost of fertiliser and the cost of contracting, which is highest in relation to really that piece of making fodder. And I think it's put us in farmers have responded really strongly to that national challenge over the course of this year, and we're in a strong position now coming out of the ploughing here, going into the winter, in relation to our national fodder situation, and also an increasingly strong as well in relation to grain. And today then I announced as well that there will be a tillage scheme next year as well, and give confirmation on that. I felt it was important with the approval of Minister for Public Expenditure Michael McGrath to do that here at the ploughing, because the fact that ploughing is so much about tillage, so much about our cereal sector, and I hope that will give the confidence now going into next year. And again, likewise in relation to green, the budget, my key objective is to look to support farm families next year.
Well, like farm families, farming is an enterprise and it's a business, but farmers are not supported in the energy support scheme, or not included. Why, I suppose a farmer might ask, why can they not apply under that scheme?
Well, so listen, in terms of the budget yet, we're finalising discussions across the range of supports that will be available across various parts of the economy. And I'm engaging with other ministers and with the Minister for Public Expenditure in relation to the supports they'll have in place there. The supports in the ag sector have been, strong, I believe, even when you compare it to other sectors like the tillage scheme, the fodder scheme, the intervention in relation to supporting the pig sector, which was very, very significant and unprecedented. I think in the past, the largest payment that had ever been made to the pig sector to an individual farmer before was €3,000. In the payments that I just made last week to the pig sector, a very significant percentage of pig farmers received a cheque of up to €100,000. That's a reflection of the massive pressure they were under.
So it was necessary.
And it was necessary, yes, but it was a really important intervention to support them. And then likewise in the horticulture sector, that scheme that I put in place this year to support them again with high energy costs. So now listen, as we look at the budget now next week, it's about looking at the range of options and what we bring to the table to support farmers, and particularly focusing on farm family incomes and how we can try and make sure they're as strong as possible next year.
And Minister, I might just ask you as well on I suppose, a party political note before you leave us here today. How would you feel about Bertie Hearn being re-enveloped back into the Fianna Fáil fold?
Listen, I don't think it's the issue, and I think the key objective...
It's an issue for some people on the ground, I will say. I mean, the one thing that we know about agriculture and farming and rural life in Ireland is that people have long memories too. And, while everyone is happy to move on and we work off a political system of the day, whatever that be a coalition and so on, people would still feel, some people, not all, but some people would still feel quite sore about that whole situation, the recession. A lot of people lost their businesses back in those days. But there is obviously mooted rumours now that perhaps Bertie could be re-enveloped back into the Fianna Fáil party.
Well, there's no moves afoot for that. There's been media coverage of it, and there's been a few members of the parliamentary party in the context of the Good Friday Agreement have emphasised the absolute importance. And let's be clear, and I've no doubt in this, I don't think we'd have a Good Friday. We would have had a Good Friday Agreement without Bertie Hearn and the Fianna Fáil party and the leadership that was shown at that time. That's now coming up to the 25th anniversary at Easter next year. And it was in that context that the discussion and his role was very much discussed at a parliamentary party meeting, and the absolute importance of recognising that, because you're right, people have long memories, and one of the long memories that people have is how central he was to that. And any time he speaks on the issue of Northern Ireland, I still stop to listen to what he's got to say because he's such credibility. And I think as a party we want to recognise that, because as the Taoiseach and the Fianna Fáil leader during that period, he provided massive leadership, and the Fianna Fáil party provided massive leadership, and the discussion that we were having around is ensuring that is marked now 25 years on, and also importantly that we work to ensure that actually the potential of the Good Friday Agreement is properly delivered upon, because we still 25 years on see, the 1 foot in, 1 foot out. One party's out now, another party's out another time,
and they're creating massive uncertainty. Of course,
it has been really unproductive and really unfortunate and unnecessary for Northern Ireland, because we all know in politics, and certainly I do, having been in it now 11 years, it is about doing hard things at times. It's about making things happen. It's about doing things and taking grief for doing things, not doing things because you're afraid of the grief. You have to do the best you can and then explain it and stand over it. And that's what happened. That's fairness, with the role, the Good Friday Agreement, and the important role Bertie Hearn played that time, as did everybody else. Everybody jumped at that time, but we haven't seen necessarily the level of responsible politics since then across a number of fronts in Northern Ireland to actually deliver on that. And I think as we come to the 25th anniversary now next year, it's important that's reflected on. It's important we double down in relation to trying to implement that Good Friday Agreement, and that was the context that issue arose. But certainly it's not something that's in the offing. But what I think is really important, and what I feel strongly about, is recognising the massive role that Bertie Hearn as Taoiseach played and the Fianna Fáil played in that, and now also the role that we want to play, and that Micheál Martin is playing, the Taoiseach is playing in relation to trying to drive that forward through the shared island approach, through the bringing the island together, through trying to improve services, and have our people united as one in terms of how we live day to day, and sharing our island. And I think that's something that we need to see happen in relation to northern politics itself as well, in terms of the way government is done there.
Appreciate too that there are people who don't want to be united as one, as an island, in Northern Ireland, and businesses up there that operate that way also.
Not talking in the political sense. I'm talking in the shared service sense. I'm talking in how we live. That there's not division between us. That we live together in the one island in a way where we cooperate in every way possible. And it was great to, I think Minister Poots is here today, and to welcome him here yesterday. And obviously Minister Poots' very specific views, from a political point of view, but we've worked together and I've enjoyed a very strong relationship with him at a practical level in terms of actually the all-island agricultural sector, which, the rules and the animal health is the same, so much of it is intertwined. And for example, both of us working together this year made a submission to the European Union for an all-island PGI status for Irish grass-fed beef, which is really, really unique, and which is going to enhance the capacity to market and add value to Irish beef abroad, both Northern Irish beef and beef from the Republic of Ireland. And that we've worked together in that regard, and that's what we
see. Decision on that PGI, a positive decision, I suppose.
Very hopeful in terms of stepping that out. But that's what we need to see then across all sectors, north-south, but also particularly in relation to making Northern Ireland work itself.
We're running out of time. I'm sorry. Minister for Agriculture, Charlie McConalogue, thank you very much for joining us here at the Agriland Pavilion at the National Ploughing Championships. It's time now to head back out to the ploughing site, where our Agriland team are out and about chatting to all sorts of exhibitors. Stay tuned.